Now, we've all heard it before. Start your lesson with bellwork. Well, I have a secret. Bellwork doesn't do what you think it does. Hello, historians, and welcome back to this little corner of the internet where I help passionate history teachers show up confidently as they facilitate student-centered learning. If you're an educator and you want to keep learning about ways in which you can slay your teaching game, be sure to hit like and subscribe so you don't miss our weekly videos. By the end of this video, we're going to clear up some misconceptions about bellwork. We're going to learn how we can use this time more intentionally, and you'll walk away with some tried and tested bellwork ideas that'll make you a history superstar. Let's do it. Now, for starters, I know that you know obviously that starting your history lesson with bellwork is a good idea. Whether this be from our own experience, from teachers training programs, or in our own upbringing, watching our teachers assign some sort of warm-up or bellwork, we know that it serves some sort of purpose in class. I also know that most of us have a general understanding that bellwork is a great way to start our lesson because, it engages students to get their gears in history mode, keeps them busy while you do administrative tasks like take attendance. And overall, it just keeps your class out of trouble. However, oftentimes, what I've noticed sometimes and experienced and done myself is that bellwork is planned kind of as a last minute afterthought, which is well, let me peruse through the internet and just have them do that little ditto, or maybe just have them do a fun trivia question to kind of get them engaged in the class. And that's all good and fine, right? Because that's building community. And I'm also not saying that these purposes for bellwork are necessarily wrong, because if it works for you and you have plenty of instructional time, you have a really flexible teaching schedule for whatever reason, and you can actually, spare some time to do fun little polls and trivia. But if you're a teacher with limited teaching time, maybe you're in a tested area, you have, set learning outcomes, maybe your course does have some sort of standards, or maybe your district does periodical assessments just to make sure that you're up to pace, or maybe you have students that lack background knowledge, then we need to reconsider how we use our bellwork time. Now, if you want to start your history lesson more intentionally, you don't want to continue making bellwork an afterthought. So the first thing you want to do to start your history lesson in the best way possible is first, plan your lesson for the day. You want to get really clear on what your students need to know, what questions they need to be able to answer, what they need to understand, what big ideas they need to understand, vocabulary they need to know in order to grasp these concepts. And for this, you definitely want to go back and revisit your standards. So that's first. The second thing you want to do is look at your data and observations. What did your students struggle with yesterday, last week, last year, last test? Now, I understand that some of our history content areas may not all be tested. So in this case, you may look to maybe other exams or just the assessments you have in class, as well as your own observations and feedback about student performance and mastery. So with that in mind, you want to really take the time to look at what areas of weakness do your students have based on these observations? Where are they getting stuck, and where have they gotten stuck, right? Is it the vocabulary? Is it not having enough background knowledge? Is it not understanding the question? Where are they getting stuck? And so a great way to find out if you're not sure and you're well, I teach the student, but I'm not entirely sure yet, or it's too early in the school year for me to really know. So some suggestions that I have to find out where your students are at is conducting polls either at the start or at the end of the unit. Obviously, accessing test data that could be summative, that could be formative, through quizzes, participation, or if you do standard-based grades, you can look at how students scored for those grades, since you're grading based on their standard mastery. Now, once you take the time to evaluate where your students are getting stuck, you might also want to think about what background knowledge are your students lacking. And for a history classroom, usually it's one of these areas. It's either vocabulary, historical context, historical terminology, things like analyze, compare, contrast, evaluate, that kind of jargon, and or are they lacking reading comprehension skills? Now, once you have an idea of the chinks in the armor, so to speak, you can start thinking about what brief activities you can embed to the start of your history lesson to target those areas of weakness. Now, I like to think of it this way. Let's say you're scrolling around on the internet and you impulsively find some sort of handout that you think might be cute or fun or relevant, and know, it's related to the topic you'll be covering in class, so you're like, great, this is it. But if it's not specifically tailored to your students' knowledge or skill need, that's kind of the equivalent of when the fairy godmother tried to give Cinderella another horse so she could get to the ball when Cinderella really just needed a dress to get there. So before you think of ways in which you could engage students, right, at the start of class or even keep them busy, ask yourself what the purpose of your bell work is and how it's going to help students in reaching their learning outcome. Now, if you're still with me so far, comment "saved by the bell" to let me know that you are enjoying this video and finding it helpful. Now, leveraging your instructional time is just one of the many ways that I know can help you show up more confidently in your classroom. If you want to feel like a confident teacher every day about your management, your teaching, your engagement, your effectiveness, then I highly recommend my free resource linked below for you, the Confident Teacher Companion, How to Feel Like a Master Teacher Every Day. Now that we know how we can use bell work time more intentionally for our student learning needs or outcomes, it's time to talk about the juicy stuff. Bell work ideas that both engage and align to your students' learning needs. Now, although there are countless ideas for bell work, I'm going to be sharing some that are specific to a history classroom. And these activities are more often sorted into 4 major categories that are skills that you'll consistently see being a need, an area of need in a social studies classroom. So the first one is vocabulary. So some great bell work ideas to getting your students on point with their vocabulary are things like sorting activities where you issue out vocabulary pairs to students as they walk through the door, and their bell work assignment essentially is to match up with their correct buddy or partner. In other words, the definition. You could also give students a definition and they can go post or tape their word next to the word wall if you have it posted around the room. You can also conduct an I have who has game. So if you don't know what an I have who has game is, as essentially the card might say, I have 1607. Who has the name of the first permanent English settlement? And then another student will stand up and say, I have Jamestown. Who has a crop grown in the southern colonies? So another student will stand up and their card will say, I have tobacco. Who has, and then another term. So it's kind of like a chain that goes around. And this is a great way to get collaboration. Students can help each other, buddy up with a neighbor, something to that extent. They can use their notes or the word wall for support as well. Now, workbook handouts can be used creatively, again, if they're aligned to student needs. But remember, our goal is to create student-centered instruction. So in this case, let's say that we do want to do some sort of workbook handout. A great idea is to have students actually lead the class. And personally, something that I did with my students was I allowed students, a particular student, to be the coach for the class. They would come sit at my desk. I would have the words projected or the assignment projected up on the screen. And even if they didn't know all the answers, because they were the instructional coach for that bell work day, they could call on a classmate, on a peer, on a friend to help them write the answers or the responses up for the class to follow along with. So that's kind of a fun, different thing that you can do when you are going to use something like workbooks for a bell work assignment. And you'd be surprised, some students really like being in the spotlight. Online games are another quick, great way to get students engaged and practicing vocabulary words intentionally that they'll be seeing throughout instruction for the class period. And when students get bored of being online, because sometimes technology can be disengaging to our students, you can always go traditional and just do an in-class trivia game. Now, our next category are practice questions. Especially if you're a tested area, students need to practice in the way that they will be assessed. So there's no beating around the bush. They need to do some sort of practice questions. And for something like that, again, when you're doing some sort of handout assignment that they're expected to actually answer practice questions, you can have students be the instructional coach for the period, guide the class. You can make the questions an actual class game, either online or in person, and just use practice test questions as the trivia. You can also do quizzing matches matches where students are partnered up with someone and they take turns quizzing each other. And you can make it like a class tournament over the course of a week, because obviously bell work is just a little frame of time. Now this next one is great for teachers whose assessments are a little bit more complex. So maybe like AP exams, testing formats where students have multiple response, fill in the blank type responses, or something to that extent. You can do little activities where students look at responses and then select which one does not belong or which ones do belong. So you are having students do corrective type of practice questions. If it is a short answer response, you can have the student, kind of like on American Idol where you have the judges judge the performers. Okay, so you can do the same thing with your questions. You can literally have a committee or separate into teams and have like one team judge to speak on behalf of the group, and they can determine, you know, why this student picked the wrong answer or what they should have done instead or how to better present their thesis, etc. Another great bell work activity that could help you start your history lesson in the best way possible is actually assessing your learners, knowing where they're at, what they're getting from instruction, and helping you predict what they'll need additional support with. And so for this type of bell work, some ideas you might consider are, again, online or in-person games where you offer formative or summative type questions. A fun and challenging twist on this is actually doing a student-led game where the students come up with the assessment, where the students are the ones leading the game, picking the players, picking the teams, picking out the questions. Again, if your students are going to be assessed in a more complex way, you want to make sure that you're practicing this, but you don't want to do handouts every day. You can also do some sort of matching. So like a mega matching activity, or this is your question, find the person that has the answer to your question. You can do a traditional quiz. You can do a pre-assessment to find out where your students are at so you know what bell work to plan for this unit. You can also use your bell work time to do a pre-exam checkup. So kind of a predictor of, if this was your test day, where would you be at? And I don't know about you, but if you have students that get the jitters when it's time to take tests, this is great for helping them be a little bit more at ease since they know how they would perform at that moment. You can also do traditional formative assessments or the ever so famous parking lot question. Now, the fourth thing you can do as a bell work activity to help start your history lesson in the best way possible is you actually use this time for prep work. So things like having students watch a specific video. So you want to think kind of like a flipped classroom type of experience, except that they're in school and they're in class with you, which is great because then you can make sure that they're actually watching the video, but it primes the student for the lesson. This is also a great time if you're going to be reading some text. You can have students pre-read or annotate. If you're going to do preparation types of activities, this is also a great time where students can practice applying specific testing strategies that you want them to rehearse. If they're going to be writing a thesis in class that day, or a thesis sentence, or short answer responses, you can use your bell work time as a brainstorming session, either by themselves or in a group. Prep work may even involve just having students write notes to get them ready for instruction, kind of their own scaffolding document that'll help them answer more complex questions as the class progresses. Now, these are just some of the most common practical ideas for bell work, but if you're interested in a guide on different bell work ideas and how to execute them for your history classroom, comment, give me more, and I will start working on that resource. If you enjoyed this video, check out my playlist on how to teach history in an interesting way, and I'll go ahead and link that down below for you to watch. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss next week's video. I'm rooting for your excellence. I applaud your passion, and your students and I believe in you. Until next time, class dismissed.